Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's event. I just saw somebody I knew. I'm kind of surprised to see him there. Welcome. I am Jeff Paulette from the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation, and we are co-sponsoring with the World Affairs Council this year's Great Decision Series. We are proud and happy to do so. It's been a very fruitful partnership for both organizations. It helps advance our mission of highlighting the importance of character and virtue in our politics, and also fits nicely with President Ford's interest in an international agenda. We are also happy to partner with our friends at the Library and Museum, owned and operated by the National Archives. Having tough days, but we're also very happy to partner with them. So thank you for coming and for braving the cold, and I will turn it over to Michael Van Denen.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for attending on such a chilly night in West Michigan, but we're used to that, right, Michiganders? And those of you who are watching live stream from wherever you are, I hope it's warmer than it is here. Good evening and welcome to the World Affairs Council of Western Michigan's third program in our 8-week series called Great Decisions. It's provided by the Foreign Policy Association of America. They've been doing this since the mid-50s, mid-1950s, this program's going on. And we here at the World Affairs Council of West Michigan have been a part of almost all of them. So this series has been going on for a long time. On behalf of my colleagues, Erica Kubik and Rachel Brook and Abigail Stead, and the Board of Directors of the World Affairs Council, thank you for being with us. And we're encouraged that you care about the world, that you are world aware, and you want to learn more about it. Because that's our motto. We think to change the world, you first have to know the world. And our mission is to empower the people and organizations of West Michigan to engage thoughtfully with the world. And you can learn more about what we do at worldmichigan.org. We're pleased to host this series with the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Museum, deeply grateful to them, and to the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation for being our partners on the series. Thanks as well to the GRCC video staff and the museum video staff team for helping us live stream today. We express also our appreciation to WGVU Public Media as our media sponsor, and to the Community Media Center as our communication partner. Let me introduce our presenter for the evening. Gert-Jan Segers is a Dutch politician who was a member of their House of Representatives between 2012 and 2023. In 2015, he became parliamentary leader as well as the leader of the Christian Union Party and held those positions until 2023. A native of Lissy, Segers studied political science at Leiden University and obtained a master's degree from Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. From 2000 to 2007, he was a Christian missionary in Egypt. And from 2008 to 2012, he was chairman of the Christian Union think tank, the Van Prinsterer Foundation. He's also a columnist for the Dutch newspaper Nederlands Dagblad and has written extensively in his native language, authoring multiple books and novels. Additionally, since 2023, he has been co-host of a weekly podcast that engages in domestic and international politics with Klaas Dijkhoff, a colleague from the Dutch VVD, or Free Market Party. Gert-Jan is a Calvin University this semester, and he's a visiting scholar. He teaches a course for political science on contemporary issues in comparative politics, faith, and politics in Europe. In addition, Segers is leading a faculty reading group sponsored by the Calvin Center for Christian Scholarship on the topic Speaking with Each Other in Our Polarized Political Times. He's also doing some consulting for Calvin University's De Vries Institute for Global Faculty Development. I'd like you to know, too, that Mr. Segers will deliver a lecture sponsored by the Frederick Meyer Chair in Dutch Language and Culture at Calvin. He'll deliver that at the Calvin's campus and the Fine Arts Center at 7 p.m. on April 3. So you might want to put that down in your notes. Working title for that lecture is Revolt of the Unheard, Populism Comes to the Netherlands. Be sure to check out that program. Tonight, he's going to give a few opening remarks, and then he will engage in a moderated discussion with Dr. Joel Westra, who's chair of the Politics and Economics Department at Calvin and director of their pre-law program. This program is sponsored by the Department of Politics and Economics, as well as the Frederick Meyer Chair in Dutch Language and Culture at Calvin. They are tonight's topic sponsors. We're also grateful to Einhorn LLC for their support as an additional topic sponsor. So please welcome to the podium Gert-Jan Segers.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, host of this beautiful place, staff of World Affairs Council, Western Michigan, thank you for having me here. Last Sunday, it was a year ago that Alexei Navalny died. He was in a prison camp in the Arctic spheres of northern Russia. And he stood up against President Putin and paid the highest possible price. Last week, President Trump made his decision public that he will start talks with Russia about the future of Ukraine. We will be in Saudi Arabia without Ukraine and without Europe. And he already made clear that Ukraine will to have cede land to Russia, because Russia fought hard for this land and they lost a lot of soldiers. And it's right now that these talks between the US and Russia have started and that the future of millions of Ukrainians are on the table in Riyadh. And it will also define the future of the cooperation between Europe and the US, the future of NATO. And it's right now that Europe is in a state of shock and fear and grief over a long relationship that seems to go into a serious crisis. The European leaders came together in Paris and discussed this critical question of today. And now what? But that's in other parts of the world. We are in Grand Rapids, and we are here at the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Museum, discussing a critical issue in critical times. And I want to thank this chapter of the World Affairs Council and Calvin University for having me. And for having me to share some thoughts on the future of NATO and the long-term cooperation of your country and the continent and the country that I live in, Europe and the Netherlands. And we are meeting in a part of Michigan that is full of Dutch family names with look-alike windmills. We're meeting in a city where they say, if you ain't Dutch, you ain't much. So no better place to build bridges again. Let me start with an important speech of the President of the United States. And I will read telling parts of his speech. Then he says, as your president, I find it, unhappily, necessary to report that the future and the safety of our country and our democracy are overwhelmingly involved in events far beyond our borders. And those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. Just as our national policy in internal affairs has been based upon decent respect for the rights and the dignity of all our fellow men within our gates, so our national policy in foreign affairs has been based on a decent respect for the rights and the dignity of all nations, large and small. And the justice of morality must and will win in the end. Again, this president, let us say to the democracies, we Americans are vitally concerned in your defense of freedom. We are putting forth our energies, our resources, and our organizing powers to give you the strength to regain and maintain a free world. We shall send you in ever-increasing numbers, ships, planes, tanks, guns. This is our purpose and our pledge. This nation has placed its destiny in the hands and heads and hearts of its millions of free men and women, and its faith in freedom under the guidance of God. Freedom means the supremacy of human rights everywhere. Our support goes to those who struggle to gain those rights and keep them. These are words of Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1941 in his famous speech, State of the Union of that year, the For Freedom speech. It was another time with similar dilemmas, but with other choices than the ones that the current president is making right now. President Roosevelt had the conviction that the US and Europe not only had strong historical bonds. As European immigrants came to America, came to Michigan, and founded a country based on values and on the idea of freedom and liberty for all. But President Roosevelt was also convinced that the US and Europe had a common future. In a violent and dangerous world, the US and Europe were democracies in which human rights and freedom were the foundation for both civilizations. That was the reason why the US came to Europe's rescue in the darkest days of the 20th century and liberated us from the Nazi rule and ended the Holocaust. It was the moment when, as Roosevelt put it earlier, the justice of morality did win. That strong moral bond was why the US and Europe stood shoulder to shoulder in the Cold War, as free civilizations opposing the communistic regime of oppression. That was why Europe stood shoulder to shoulder with America when Al-Qaeda attacked the US on 9/11. And we went to war together. And again, when we were at war with the ones who are giving shelter to the masterminds of these atrocities. Again, American and European soldiers, including Dutch, were fighting together, dying together, including the Dutch, for our common freedom and safety. And this is much more of a covenant, based on a promise to help each other whatever it takes, and not so much of a contract that is transactional, that you can stop when it's not beneficial anymore. If you are assuming that I believe that President Roosevelt made the right choice in 1941, then you're right. But you also might think that was the past. What are reasons to keep on investing in the transatlantic covenant, in the transatlantic cooperation? Why would your tax money has to go to the security of Europe, to Ukraine, as it has been fighting already for 3 years in an existential war? This is the point of President Trump. Well, I will come to a slide in a few minutes that is titled, President Trump was right. But first, there are very good reasons to continue this alliance, to cherish NATO. There are very good reasons to hold hands in this world, a violent, dangerous world. Our common history matters. Our shared values matter. Mutual trust and understanding, which are rare in our world, and which have been the foundation of our bond, of our covenant for decades, they matter. But there are also transactional reasons to hold hands. Good reasons that hopefully someday will make it to the Oval Office. That good reason is that no other two regions in this world are as deeply integrated and connected as the US and Europe. The US and Europe are each other's most important markets and economic partners. This is about the future of millions of jobs, 60 million of jobs. This is about the future of million jobs. This is about 6.9 trillion commercial sales a year. This is about a third of the world's GDP. This is about several hundred billion of good trades every year between both continents. This is about millions of Americans who are working in Europe and millions of Europeans working in the US. This is about more than 60% of foreign investment that comes from UA, global investment, that goes to Europe, and more than 60% of EU global investment that goes to America. Again, no other two regions in this world are as deeply integrated and connected as the US and the EU. And in an uncertain world, there are other alliances trying to break these ties. Other mighty nations that envy our strong economies, that hate human rights, that hate freedom of religion, that hate democracy, that hate political freedom, and that are willing to hurt us as much as possible. There are very good reasons, and also economic reasons, to protect what we have together. And yes, President Trump was right. Europe was not doing enough. As you can see in this slide, till 2014, there was even decreasing the investment expenditure on defense, with a turning point in 2015, with a little bit up in 2017, as Trump was warning Europe to spend more on defense. But the real turning point here was 2022, the invasion in Ukraine. But as you can see in the beginning, Europe was not paying for its security, was not investing in NATO enough. President Trump said it over and over again, and he was right. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, we spoke about peace dividend. And we thought that we had a life insurance with the US. For example, in the economic crisis in 2011, the Netherlands sold all its tanks. We didn't have ammunition for our military exercises. And faced with possible anger of voters for not delivering good healthcare, for example, we sacrificed our security on the long term. When do you realize that you're stupid? That you were stupid? You realize it when you face the consequences. And that's right now. That's why Europe is in shock and grief and angry. And also angry about itself, with itself. And they know we were stupid. We is a collective responsibility. Not so much a personal or political, or it's not a choice, a personal choice of a political choice. The party that I was part of, every time we were part of a coalition government, we were investing in defense. So from my party, it was another story. But we is a collective guilt. is a collective responsibility of Europe not doing enough. But Europe has changed. You see already here the change, and you see when in 2014 only 3 member states of NATO were meeting the 2% norm of NATO. It was the US, it was the UK, and it was Greece. So now we have 23 nations, including the Netherlands, that are meeting the 2% norm. So we have changed. And there is growth in defense expenditure. So we see the impact of the words of Donald Trump, and we see much stronger the impact of the war in Ukraine. As you can see here, here are all the member states of NATO. All the states have sometimes even doubled, compared 2014 to 2024, doubled their expenditure on defense. And many of them are now above the 2% norm, including the Netherlands. There's only one country that is spending less, and that's the US. But still, they're spending a lot, and they are far above the 2% norm. But this is the change. This is the change that is happening right now, after a rightful warning from President Trump. In 2014, it was well below 30% of the expenditure within NATO that came from Europe and Canada. Less than 30%. So you see, it wasn't a fair share. It wasn't a good job that Europe and Canada were doing. Now we are very close to 40% of NATO expenses. Change is happening. Things are changing. So yes, Trump was right, but maybe he's not right on the long term, and things are changing. Here you see expenditure of Europe and Canada really going up a little bit from 2014, but the real change happened after 22, the invasion of Russia in Ukraine. What now? These are critical times. We have critical issues, and we have decisions to make. The freedom and the right of self-determination of Ukraine is on the table in Riyadh right now. These days will define the future of Ukraine. It will draw the borders of Europe. These talks in Riyadh will decide whether the Baltic states, Poland, Moldova, and other countries in Eastern Europe will have to fear for another war, a war within their borders. Ukraine is a test case for President Putin, who wants to go down in history as the leader, as the ruler that expanded the empire. And whatever he promised to do, till now, he did it. He started in 2008 with the invasion of Georgia. He moved to Crimea in 2014. And then after the lack of any decisive response from the West, he launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. And he continues to attack Western facilities, infrastructure. He destroys cables. He's interfering in elections like the one in Romania. And Putin will not stop until he is stopped. Ukraine is the test case for the will of the people. Ukraine is the test case for a world order that respects the will of the people. And Ukraine is the test case for China that aims to wage a war on Taiwan and wants to include Taiwan by violent means into China. And the outcome of these talks, they will send a message to dark forces in the Middle East that believe in a violent jihad and see if the West remains unified. This year will be decisive whether the two most integrated and connected regions in the world will stay together, or that their bond will be broken by political choices made in the US right now. This is about the future of our covenant. So how do we move from here? Yes, still Europe has to do more. Europe has to be able to defend itself, and is not able to do so right now. So yes, Europe has to do more. We need to move, and we will continue to speak about that in our discussion. We need to move to a two-pillar NATO. A pillar for Europe and a pillar for Northern America, where Europe will be responsible for its own region, its own continent, its own security, but within NATO, with keeping the covenant we build. Let me end with Alexei Navalny. He stood up against President Putin. He was poisoned. They thought he would die, and he did it. He went to Germany for recovery, and when he was recovered, when he was healthy again, he decided to go back to Russia. And the question he got over and over again was, why did you come back, Alexei? And then he said, I have my convictions. I have my principles. And I made a promise to the people of Russia, whenever I was in a city, whenever I was in a village, whenever I was on a platform, I made a promise to the people of Russia, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. I will stay faithful to Russia. And he wrote in his book, and I just finished it Saturday night, just the night before we had the first anniversary of his death. And he finished his book and he said, my calling is to seek the kingdom of God and its righteousness. And he was deeply touched by the words of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. That was his promise. That was his calling. That was his goal. That's why he came back to Russia. We should ask ourselves, why should we stay together? We also made a promise. We have a covenant, not a contract. We have a covenant. And more important, if we go back into history, if we see our cooperation and our connection in this world, and if we dig in our deepest convictions, we find the same belief as Alexei Navalny had, that we hunger and thirst for righteousness and for freedom. Navalny was alone in prison, and he died alone. We are together with two continents, two free societies of free people, two strong economies with the oldest democracies in the world, and two armies that are getting stronger every day. And this is my plea. Let's stay together in this dangerous world and be faithful to our promise, be faithful to our covenant and to our deepest convictions. And with that conviction, the justice of morality will win in the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gert-Jan, for framing the conversation for us, for giving us a contemporary European perspective on a lot of big issues. I wanted to start out by turning the conversation to a little bit more of a personal perspective level. You had served from 2017 until 2022 as part of the Mark Rutte third and fourth coalition government.
Yes.
And what an incredible time to be in that position. So during that time, the Dutch government declared Russia to be responsible for the downing of Malaysian Airlines Flight 17, and then tried 3 individuals in absentia for their involvement. Donald Trump, of course, entered office, his first term as President of the United States, came to Europe, initially failed to endorse Article 5 of NATO, the core of that covenant, as you so rightly have called it. and then subsequently initiated a trade war with the EU by imposing tariffs on aluminum and steel. Tell us more about your personal experience and perspective on U.S.-European relations at that time as a member of the Dutch government.
Very, very good memories. I mean, I had a lot of conversation with people of the embassy, a very well-informed embassy in The Hague, always very interested. My first political issue that dealt with the US was about the Netherlands buying the Joint Strike Fighter, the F-35. And Dutch politics is very slow. I mean, you have a president coming in the morning, and in the afternoon he's signing executive orders. So we start with a coalition discussion, and that will take like 6 months. So that's our politics, very, very slow. So also the decision-making regarding the F-35 was very slow. And I remember coming here to the US with a whole group of members of parliament. America was very, very patient and very understanding. And eventually, I mean, we started to buy the fighter jet, and we were partnering in the same in this project. So there was always a warm friendship and a lot of understanding. And now looking back, maybe it was too friendly. So as I said, President Trump was right. So it was a little bit of shock when he came into power. The reception in Europe was, well, this must be an accident. I mean, this was a mistake. I mean, so it was a kind of weird attitude towards the outcome of a democratic process here in the US. But I think our prime minister was one of the first who understood that President Trump was serious. So he went to the Oval Office and he had a conversation. And he said, well, President Trump, you are right. And then when Trump was saying, well, we might break up with NATO or we might not, Article 5, we might look at it differently. Prime Minister Mark Rutte was interrupting and saying, no. I mean, they were sitting with the fire as we are sitting now. I mean, so they were sitting there. And he understood this is serious. And as Mark Rutte was able to hold a very wild coalition together from sometimes the Green Party and then we're an extreme right-wing party, and he was able to hold the whole thing together in our polarized small nation. He might be the right person to serve NATO and keep on investing in this good relationship with America. But these are dark days. I mean, so this is quite different from when I was member of parliament and what I remember. For example, the MH17, I mean, the downing of the airplane with almost 200 people, Dutch people who died and more others who died in Ukraine because of the shooting of this airline, of this plane. I mean, there was this connection in the Western world, and it was like as we were standing together with the US in a different level and different scale, but 9/11, I mean, it united us. We had a little bit of the sense, okay, we are in this together. I mean, we have friends in this wild world, and we can see what happens. So it always has been friendly, constructive, and a little bit puzzling in the first term of President Trump, trying to understand what is going on here. And that was new.
You mentioned that Mark Rutte might be very well positioned for the way forward. What things have you been able to observe about him in his current role?
Well, he's very nice to President Trump. He's praising him all the time. I think that's a good approach. It's very wise. And I think he is able to build bridges. And he's now pushing Europe and say, well, you need to spend more. Great that you're reaching the 2% norm. But now we need to look at 5%. So though he was the prime minister actually who sold our tanks. So there is some history with him as well. I will not remind him every day of that. But I think he will be able to push Europe further than where they are now. And if he is not doing it, Eastern European countries like Poland, like the Baltic states, they will do it. They know how serious it is. It is deadly serious.
Well, I imagine that leading coalition government in the Netherlands probably is good training for trying to hold together all the European members.
It was
of
a
NATO.
very long training. I mean, he was prime minister for a very long time. Yeah.
Talking more specifically about NATO, NATO's current strategic concept, adopted in 2022, names Russia as the most significant and direct threat to the Allies' security, names terrorism as the most direct asymmetric threat to the security of our citizens and international peace and prosperity. It additionally notes that conflict, fragility, and instability in Africa and the Middle East directly affect our security. And if that weren't enough, that China's stated ambitions and coercive policies challenge our interests, security, and values. What specific threats and opportunities do you see for NATO in those areas?
Well, threats are very serious. I mean, the University of Leiden, so my old university, just calculated that was like in 23 and 24, Russia attacked Europe, disrupted Europe. So there were 57 incidents. So it was destroying a cable. So they recently destroyed the cable between the Baltic states and Scandinavia. So digital infrastructure, physical infrastructure, interfering in elections like Romania, as I was mentioning. So 57 incidents. It were 13 in 23 and more than 40 in 24. So it is increasingly becoming an issue. It is not yet, we are not ready, we are not about to see Russia invading the Baltic states. I mean, not now, they're heavily involved in Ukraine. But they don't want Europe to succeed, they don't want NATO to succeed, they don't want a strong alliance, they don't want to keep this bond. So they are disrupting as much as possible. And encouraging parties that are on their side. For example, now the second party in Germany, so we'll have elections in Germany this Sunday. The second party is the AfD, who are kind of positive. They have a positive attitude towards Russia. So they might get help. I mean, so they might, I mean, even like on social media, for example, that was the case in Romania. All of a sudden they were pushing for a candidate, no one knew. Now all of a sudden he was there. And they stopped the election process. I mean, the procedure, which is a very strange thing to do. So it is serious. It's increasingly the approach of Russia to interrupt, to disrupt, to destroy, to dismantle, to break the European ties and to break the transatlantic ties. So it is existential. It is for our security, for the security of the Baltic states. Again, not on the short term, but they might be next. Moldova, Poland, they are scared. You saw the figure, especially in Poland. Now they are almost reaching the 5% spending on defense. So they are very serious. So yes, that is something that NATO was designed for. I mean, NATO was to protect all of us. So if you take one of us, you take all of us. And because when you know that we will revenge. I mean, we will come back as a collective power. I mean, Russia, till now, has stopped before the borders of NATO countries, but is now testing. Are they serious? Is this covenant a real covenant, or is it a contract that might be ripped apart? So they are testing. Yes, this is a test case for NATO. And then Africa. Well, the demographics in Africa are. I mean, they have growing population. I mean, it's just exploding. And then with shrinking population in Europe, migration will be a huge issue. As we have seen in all democracies, Western democracies, migration is a vital central issue and is encouraging populist parties and right-wing parties to grow. And of course, there are a lot of jihadic movements now. For example, in Sahel and Sub-Sahara, Nigeria, Somalia. These are threats. These are almost our direct neighbors. So these are threats for Europe. China is much more of an economic power. Of course, there is the issue of Taiwan. That might be a military issue. But the economic power of China is enormous, and they are more investing in economic power. So yes, it is critical, and it's vital what they wrote down. That was the purpose why NATO was created, to defend us all, to defend our economy, our freedom, our societies, our people, and that's being tested now.
There's so many of those threats really right on the doorstep of Europe.
Yes.
Do you think the China issue will sort of fall off the table, or is there enough bandwidth to keep an eye on China as well as everything else within NATO?
So China is in the digital world a threat. I mean, they are, so with TikTok, for example, so there is a security threat. So TikTok is from China. They might use it to spy on a lot of people. So our public servants are not allowed to go on TikTok, for example. I mean, it is serious. So this is about knowledge, and this is about economic power, and this is about, stealing information. Different scale, but also disruptive, but not, at this moment, not a military threat. But of course, I mean, for them, Ukraine is the test case. And when they go after Taiwan, I mean, how will the world respond? How will the US respond? How will NATO respond? Do we keep a world order that respects borders and the sovereignty of nations?
Well, I think you're right to point out, too, in a globally interconnected world in terms of economics, in terms of telecommunications, as you've suggested, the Chinese threat is in some sense right on the front door of Europe as well. So throughout the Cold War and beyond, and this is consistent with some of the things you'd noted, there's a tradition that Trump was more strident on, but he certainly wasn't alone. The United States had always advocated for a strengthened European pillar within NATO.
Yes.
Last year, French President Emmanuel Macron called on France's European allies to develop a credible strategic concept to defend Europe on their own if necessary. And now, immediately, has hosted an informal summit to address the future of European security cooperation. And meanwhile, as we were just talking about, the Trump administration seems much more focused on China as the primary US security threat to US interests, and quite disinclined in general towards overseas military commitments. What do you see for the future of NATO and transatlantic security cooperation?
It was 1962 that John F. Kennedy came with the idea of a two-pillar NATO, as I was mentioning in the introduction. And it never took off. It never really happened, as Europe was heavily depending on US. And there was quite a presence of the US Army in Europe, in Germany, but also in the Netherlands, other parts. And we just took it for granted. We just thought, well, okay. And after the fall of the Berlin Wall, we thought, well, great. Now we were spending on our military, but now we don't have to. And that brought us in the state where we are now. And it's as I said, we were stupid. But reviving the idea of a two-pillar NATO, I think that is the way forward. There are people in Europe say, well, we should have like a European army. We should have the EU taking up this responsibility for security and safety. But the thing is, like, if you saw the people who were on the table in Paris, well, also Keir Starmer, Prime Minister of England, not an EU member anymore, but a very important European player and a very important army. Same case, Norway, for example. So still NATO is very relevant also in the European context, but then we should continue with this two-pillar idea. But then Europe has to take care of its own security. So protecting the border of Europe, having the presence of fleet ships in the Mediterranean, that should be a European responsibility. So now the American fleet is in Spain, and they still have a responsibility there. We should take over. I mean, yes, this is the time to say, well, things have changed. The European Union alone is 450 million people, with the UK even more than the US. So again, President Trump was right. I mean, why are we paying for the security of Europe? But then again, looking at the historic bonds, looking at the trust, looking at the cooperation, look at the economic ties, look at the cultural ties, look at the political systems we have, and look around in this world. We have so much in common. It would be also very, very stupid to break NATO and say, well, we as Europe can do it alone. I mean, right now we cannot do it. But even in the future, if we would be able, I mean, we shouldn't. So we should keep this covenant. And that was the insight that President Roosevelt was sharing in 1941, because he was facing the same criticism. Why should we interfere in a war in Europe again? And he said, okay, what if? What if these evil powers win and democracy dies in Europe? Do you think that that threat, that we will be able to hold off on our own, that we will be able to defend ourselves in this wild world? When Europe falls, will we be able to defend ourselves? We will not. So he already saw that there is a mutual interest. I mean, we need each other in this violent world with powers like China, like Russia, and like jihadism, which is less organized, but very much of a threat everywhere, as we have seen 9/11, as we have seen in multiple attacks in cities in Europe. It is deadly serious. So it would be so stupid to break it up. But I'm not very hopeful right now. I mean, it was a plea from my side, but I'm a powerless, normal civilian. I'm not a politician anymore, so it's powerless. But this would be my plea. I mean, looking at what is at stake, looking where we are, looking in our common interest and our common history, we need each other.
I think you've raised two very important points about the role of NATO. The one overarching point, we were talking briefly before your lecture tonight about the U.S. late entry into World War I, and within a decade, the Americans were gone. NATO ensured that after World War II, the U.S. security commitment to Europe has remained and has stayed intact.
Yes.
And you also brought up the United Kingdom. NATO plays this crucial role in tying together European states for security, even states that aren't part of the EU. We used to think about that as the Cold War neutrals or the states on their way to the EU. Now they've all come in mostly to NATO or the EU, but the UK out of the EU, but still in NATO. So
Yes.
That's an important ongoing role as well.
And it's interesting that you bring up the analogy of 1914. As Wilson, he invented the idea of the League of Nations. So he said, let's make a system that we help each other, that we have cooperation, that we at least talk instead of fight. And he was thinking about this kind of covenant or this kind of cooperation, this kind of promise to France and England. And it was a kind of silly incident between one senator and President Wilson that eventually the US did not become, though it was located in the US, did not become part of the League of Nations, part of this system, part of this promise of a possible threat that would have been there if the promise was made and kept in 1933, in 1939, when Hitler came to power. What if the US already had this promise to England and France? Let's promise to help each other in critical times. That would have been a completely different story. I mean, still Germany might have attacked, but they would have thought a few times more before attacking Poland, before attacking UK and France. So not having this mechanism in place, it has consequences. So now we still have it. The Baltic states with, 30% of Russians living in these states. So there might be an excuse for Putin to say, well, I need to protect my people or whatever he can come up with. Having a mechanism, Article 5, we protect each other, will make him think twice. If we don't have it in place, we know what will happen. We know it because we saw the pattern in Georgia, we saw the pattern in Crimea, we saw the pattern in the rest of Ukraine. And he's bombing schools, he's bombing elderly people, he's bombing city centers, he's bombing whatever he can. We know what will happen. Devastation, absolutely. So thinking of 1914 and this strange turn of events, US not becoming part of this mechanism, hopefully inspires us to think twice before we break up NATO.
Let's turn to our audience now. Our audience members always have very good questions. I'll try to look for people. Erica Kubik has a microphone and some additional instructions.
So I'll be passing around the microphone in the audience, but if you'd like to text your question, even if you're here or if you're watching online, just text 616-308-6560.
My question has to do with President Trump and Putin. Suppose they reach an agreement about Ukraine, and it's totally unacceptable to Ukraine. What options would Europe have in that event? What do you think Europe should do in that event?
Yeah, that's another test case. That's a very good question. What if a terrible deal is made in Saudi Arabia or wherever they sign up the agreement? Ukraine will not accept it, for sure. If they are not at the table, they will not accept it. But it will be very hard for Europe to accept it when you're not at the table. I mean, when you're being sidelined, I mean, you cannot accept it. So Europe will not accept it, and that will be the ultimate test case. Will you then support Ukraine? Will you continue to finance this war? Will you finance the defense of Ukraine? I mean, it's not an attacking war. It's like a country defending itself, people defending itself, and then Europe has to decide. And my guess would be that they will do whatever they can and whatever it takes. I've seen, like, again, a personal experience with Mark Rutte. He has had several political positions on all kind of issues, and he could take whatever position was good at that point. But I saw a commitment when it comes to Ukraine that I did not see in many other issues. And I saw a commitment that I see with Macron. Emmanuel Macron, he was still talking to Putin a few days before the war started, trying to prevent the war, trying to stop the war. And he knew it's useless. It's useless. I mean, Putin is not the guy to negotiate with. Is not the guy, if he thinks you are weak, to stop something that could enlarge the Russian Empire. He will go down in history. He wants to go down in history as the one that expanded Russia. I mean, that is his main goal. He has been sacrificing already, 100,000 Russian young boys? I mean, it's incredible. Much, much more than Afghanistan, that made the Soviet Union almost collapse. I mean, he's willing to sacrifice everything for his place in history book. He's ruthless, absolutely ruthless, willing to kill whatever he can kill. Macron saw that. He discovered it. We discovered it. Rutte discovered it. Scholz, most probably the new Bundeskanzler, the new leader, prime minister of Germany, is very committed. So I saw a debate with him, with the AfD leader, and rebuking her and say, well, we are not neutral. This is existential for Europe. So all these leaders, they know now how serious it is. Poland already knew. The Baltic states already knew. And they were preaching to us. And we thought, okay. We still thought, if we are nice, they will be nice. Well, that's not the world. That's not our world anymore. That's not Putin. So I think Europe has no other chance than whatever it takes.
Troops on the ground in Ukraine? Troops on the ground in Ukraine.
Oh, my goodness. I don't see that happening. But all the resources, all the military resources, everything we can give to Ukraine, I can see that will continue for a while. But that will be weakening us. I mean, it will be draining Europe. So it's not an easy choice. And now seeing the populist movements everywhere in Western Europe coming up, and these are the people who say, well, I want good healthcare, I want to to pay less taxes, and I want to be richer, and I want to have more free time. I mean, they want a free lunch. And in that climate, making a bold decision, say, well, we need to pay. So that will demand moral leadership. Again, as Franklin Roosevelt was showing in 41. I mean, a lot of Americans didn't like going to war. And he said, we have to. And yes, you have to pay more. And yes, it will cost. I mean, we'll pay a price. But he came with moral reasons for a moral cause. And he won.
Thank you. You commented on a variety of reasons why the relationship of NATO with U.S. and the EU is important. Do you have any particular perspective from the EU or from the NATO perspective as to which arguments would be persuasive to get Trump to change his mind about how to engage? We had a lot of things out there.
You tell me.
I know what the U.S. perspective is in times, but from your perspective, what is it? I mean, and does the European view see it? Do they think Trump is motivated by the economic reason, is the 2 to 5%, or is it an ideological? What do they think is the strongest?
I was leader of a Christian party, so the moral reasons. I mean, I tend to come up with moral reasons. I mean, that flows out of my heart, and then that's a conviction. And so we have this strong bond, and we have values, and we have democracy, and we have freedom, and we have the rule of law, and we have human rights. I don't think that's the first thing that is on his mind. That's why I came up with the transactional reasons. I mean, there are also very good economic reasons. Just think of that together, these two regions. I mean, they have 1/3 of the global GDP. That's a big chunk. That's a big part. That's our economy. So having 60% of global investment of the U.S. going to Europe and vice versa. I mean, these are solid economic reasons of two regions that are so deeply connected, that have so strong economic ties. And why? Because we understand each other. I mean, we speak. My English is not perfect, but we speak the same language. I mean, we understand our values. We know what trust is. We know how you deal with human rights and how you do business properly. And so there are economic reasons, and I would say these transactional reasons. I mean, it would be so stupid to say, well, we have a pivot to Asia and let's go for a walk there and let's forget Europe. Well, look at the business that's being done on a daily basis. I mean, as I said, trillions of sales every year. I mean, it's enormous. So I think these are might be, I hope, I pray, that this will be the convincing reasons to say, well, okay, let's rethink. The thing that scares me these days is, like, in the first term, from a European perspective, when I was looking at what's happening in the US, I mean, it looked a little bit chaotic, and there was a lot of discussion within the government. So, and also the ending was like president and the vice president, I mean, completely opposed to each other. It was chaotic. And the scary thing now is it's not chaotic. I mean, there is a program, there's an agenda, there is determination. So, oh my goodness, if this is the wrong agenda, and you start signing executive orders from day one, and you continue to do so, and you know that you don't like to invest in these European ties and in NATO, and if you think, I think still it's stupid, but if you think it's not in your interest, just let's not do it, let's just abandon it, and you're determined, and there's no chaos, and there's no opposition, there are no demonstrations, it's quiet, and if you stand up within the Republican Party, I mean, you know what your fate will be. I mean, you're kicked out. Look at Liz Cheney. I mean, look at all this. Who stood up? It's the end of your political life. And then seeing that it's quiet and that there's very little opposition, with a much clearer agenda, that is scary. I hope these transactional reasons have an effect.
Thank you. I'd like to move just a little bit to the other end of the world, and that's with China. If China takes over Taiwan, they own technology vis-a-vis the chip manufacturing. What does Europe do at that point?
I think we have actually the Netherlands have the biggest factory of chip machines. So still we have something to offer. Maybe that will work with Trump as well. Yeah, that is an economic threat. I mean, look at, there is a war on national resources. Look how strategically China is investing in African countries. I mean, investing in infrastructure and getting minerals. I mean, getting rich soil out of that. Just financing their machinery, their economic machinery. So they are very strategic. They're very quiet, they have a long term. I mean, so we have every 4 years, in our case, more often, we have elections. Very disruptive. They have a plan, they have the time, they have one leader, they have, so they have a focus. And again, in that world, and if that is your opposition, that could spy on everything, everyone who has a phone here could be spied by China. That is scary. Should that not bring us closer together? I say, what can we do? We have similar values. We have a factory in the Netherlands. Let's bring that in. I mean, these are the critical issues. So again, NATO is very much needed.
Hi, thank you. My question is, if Trump, let's say he pulls out of NATO or refuses to do the mutual defense of NATO nations, can Europe, is there any leverage that Europe has to correct that decision or to pressure Trump to make the right decision? I mean, here politically, our hands are tied now. He can run with whatever he wants to do. But can Europe, are there sanctions or are there any economic or political, is there any leverage to kind of guide or to avert the worst, I guess?
No. There's very little that we can do. If one side of the transatlantic union says, well, we stop the whole thing. I mean, you cannot force people into a covenant, into a promise. If you don't want to keep it, then you're out. And again, we should come up with a variety of reasons, and I try to bring several ones, and also looking at China as was added. There are good reasons, and again, Roosevelt made this calculation himself and said, we cannot defend ourselves on our own. So he was facing Germany and Italy and Japan, and well, if they would have won, that was a difficult world for the U.S. to be in. I mean, so he made this calculation. I mean, you are a very knowledgeable, sound, healthy society. I mean, you have a lot of smart people. Your hands are not tied. I mean, you can speak, you can vote, you can write an article, you can be on the radio, whatever. I mean, of course there will be discussion here. But eventually, if that is the political outcome of discussion here in the US, there's very little Europe can do. And we are then on our own with a very violent neighbor and a very ruthless neighbor that could take other parts of Europe. I mean, we don't know what will happen, but that's possible. But again, I think reason, and I mean, there will be enough reasonable people here at one point to, you're laughing? You don't think so? I think so.
We just voted.
Yeah, but maybe for other reasons, and maybe not everyone realized what could be the outcome. I mean, he was clear about his agenda, so it was not a surprise. But maybe for other reasons, cultural reasons, whatever reasons, people voted. I mean, you have only two choices, isn't it? I mean, so we have like tons of parties we can vote. So for you, it's harder. I mean, there are some people somewhere in the middle, and well, it's either one. So, but with this critical decision, I mean, I'm sure it will not be taken overnight, and there will be discussion here.
Mr. Segers, thank you so much for Dutch American. Looking forward to speaking with you later. Several good questions have been asked. The question that comes up as many of my questions are being answered in the Q&A is, how do you think European leaders should get the mandate to become the partner of strength that Trump clearly wants in Europe?
I think strong leaders are being born in critical times, and these are critical times. So look at President Macron. He's politically in a very difficult situation as he is being squeezed between the left and the right, far left and far right, and the middle ground is very weak, which is the case in many European countries. It's a lot of division, and we have extreme left and extreme right. And so the voices of reason in the middle are kind of quiet. But realizing that it's existential, that this is about surviving of democracy and survive. I mean, I make it a little bit dramatic, but for these Baltic states, and at Calvin, there was the ambassador of one of these Baltic states, Estonia, was there. They know what it is to be under Russian rule. Poland knows. I mean, still remembers what it was to be under Russian rule. And so they already were very serious, and they were very, very strong leaders when it comes to investing in defense and helping Ukraine from day one. I mean, they were 100% committed and encouraging all of Europe, even like Scholz in Germany was a little bit hesitant. I mean, should we really be involved? I mean, might it make things worse? And will there be an escalation? And there were other leaders. They were hesitant, as Macron was trying to negotiate with Putin. Then realizing this is not the man to meet somewhere in the middle, because for him that's the beginning of a new war. For him that's the beginning of a new fight. So I see a change in his attitude in Merz, the leader of the Christian Democrats in Germany. He's absolutely committed to fight for Ukraine and to do whatever he can. And Germany is a big country. I mean, they were always hesitant to bring in their military after 2 world wars. They were very hesitant to commit to military involvement in Afghanistan or Iraq. So they were always financing and paying whatever, but sending German soldiers, still there is this sense of guilt, historic guilt. But now I think that will change. So with Merz, that will change. Macron now bringing European leaders together. These times will make from weaker leaders who are squeezed somewhere in the middle between the extremes, they will force them to be stronger leaders, decisive leaders, leaders who will act now and choose the right side of history.
So Trump has expressed admiration for Putin. And I wonder if Trump, who has already also expressed expansionist desires, turns out to be more like Putin and will do whatever it takes to get what he wants and not be someone who's willing to find compromise. How would Europe respond to that or possibly respond to that?
Yeah, it was kind of telling that, like in these first, what is it now, 4 weeks, that he is criticizing and verbally attacking Canada and Mexico. I mean, two, in my eyes, friendly neighbors. I mean, did they ever attack the US or no? And reaching out to Putin. So, yes, there is this appetite for strong leadership. There is this. I mean, at one point he was saying that Kim, the leader of North Korea, was a good guy, was an interesting guy. So there is this appetite for strong leadership, and maybe that's a good question. I mean, how can you show strength? Because that is the language that he understands. And so again, now Europe is pounding his head and saying, well, I mean, why didn't we see it? And why didn't we understand it? And why didn't we do much more in the past? But they have to now. But also, Trump is a businessman. And he thinks in transactions. And he thinks, what's in it for me? And then weighing in the economic value of good relationship with, for example, Europe. That tells a story as well. So I think you cannot change the character of a man of 78, or what is he, 78? I mean, I guess, God might do it, but we are not able to change the character. Then deal with it and speak a certain language of strength and back it up with real investment in the army. Because as we were starting, I mean, what I remember from all my encounters with Americans in the embassy, but also here in the US, maybe you were too friendly for Europe, and maybe you were too gracious to pay for our security. So it is a wake-up call. Only if you break up an army, if you break up your strength, I mean, it takes a while before you build it up again. And so we are running out of time, and we are in the middle of a war. At least Ukraine is in the middle of a war, and we are supporting Ukraine. So we don't have much time to work on our plan. So it is critical.
And we're rapidly running out of time. So one last question, a text from our audience. Globally, the last few years have been bad for governing parties due to blowback from migration patterns and post-pandemic inflation. Does Europe see the re-election of Trump in this context, or is there something qualitatively different?
Yeah, it is. Well, I can speak out of experience. That is, when you are part of a coalition in the Netherlands, it doesn't make you popular. When you make decisions and when you take responsibility, it is hard. But that's your job. I mean, that's what you have to do. That is what it is. Stand up, be brave, explain what you did, and my sense is that in critical times, as Roosevelt, I mean, he was with his back against the wall, and he didn't have much choice. I mean, so again, coming back to this strength, he knew, and this is moral leadership, and this is a deep conviction. That is in our culture, that is in our history, that is in our society, that is in our I would say, in our shared DNA. I mean, we value freedom. We are designed for freedom. We are made for freedom. And so democracy is something difficult, and it's not always fun to be in a position of responsibility as you're being criticized every day, and especially with social media. I started in 2012 as member of parliament when social media was still fun. Well, that changed. I mean, all the death threats and all the attacks every day, that changed. But as I say, if you can't stand the heat, well, get out of the kitchen. And when you're in the kitchen, then deal with it. So These are times that leadership is being born, but these are times that we all are tested and that we sense what is our foundation, what is the foundation of our society, what is the foundation of our country. At one point, you will go back. What was the design of the founding fathers? I mean, why did the Pilgrim Fathers from my hometown, Leiden, came all the way to the US? I mean, they had an idea of liberty, freedom for all. So you will go back eventually to your deepest conviction, to your own history, to the story of your nation, to who you are and where we are made for. So, and that's my hope. So I'm not very optimistic on the short term, but that's my deepest hope, that reason will win and morality will win. And that was the hope of Roosevelt. Remember, 41. So Hitler was at the peak of his power. He was conquering everything. He was winning every war. And still, there was this commitment, was a convinced and convincing president speaking to his Congress that was not very happy about war, not very excited about war, speaking to his fellow citizens that didn't want to pay for and knew, well, we'll pay a price, and he was able to convince them. So these times produce the right leaders, and sooner or later, these two regions with this long history, as I'm now part of a beautiful community, Calvin University, as you are reading all these books, I mean, we have so much in our heritage, so much great books, so much great writers and thinkers. It will come back sooner or later. It will come back. So that's a hope. That's not optimism in the short term, but that's a deep felt hope that the desire that we saw in Eastern Europe, that at the end of the day, we want to be free. We want to be part of that system that is called democracy, that messy system of coalitions and of legislation and of deals and of, I mean, it's a messy process. But that's what we want, because that is respecting our dignity and our freedom and our voice and who we are. And sooner or later, I mean, that will show to be the system that is sustainable. Even China, I mean, it is a formidable power, economic power. But having one man at the head of more than 1 billion people with a 5-year or 10-year plan is not a sustainable system. It is not. So our messy system, our dirty system, our system we sometimes hate, and the politicians we sometimes hate, and I was one, and I was sometimes hated. Let's cherish it. Let's be proud of that, and let's go back to why we designed the design we have, and why we did it. And let's reinvent ourselves, and let's reinvent our friendship and our covenant. And I like to be in America. I like you. Thank you.